Hi everyone, welcome to the latest video on the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to paint the Mountains Men for a Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. So I wanted these guys to have the yellow heraldry of House Clegane, like the mountain, but I also wanted them to be less uniform than the rest of the army. So you can see how I've used quite a few different brown tones and things like that. Now if you do like how these look, please like the video and let's begin. So as always, I start the model with the eyes. Now you don't have to do this if you don't want to. I've been doing this for my whole army, so I'm used to doing it now. But I'm not being too careful, obviously. If you can be neat, try to be as neat as possible. But I'm doing this first, obviously, because if you do make a mistake, which I do, obviously, then we can come in and neaten it up straight away. So because the eyes are a bit wonky at the moment, I come in with a black. Now I'm being careful when I'm neatening up here. Essentially you want to have two small dots on the left and right side of the eye. Now this is there's loads of different ways to do eyes, but this is how I do it. It's nice and quick, and because it's at the start, it's simple. Now I use the same skin tone for my whole army, and this is Foundry, Wargames Foundry Expert Flesh, so there are quite a few colours for this skin tone, but I think with faces it's quite nice to paint them to a higher level than you would the rest of the model. Now that's because the face, or when you pick up a model and look at it, that's the first thing you get drawn to. It's a natural thing for us to do when we look at something. You're drawn to the face and the base. So take your time with this, be careful, because obviously the eyes are already painted, and that's the first base colour. Now once that's properly dry, I come in with the second base colour. Now because the first colour obviously doesn't have 100% coverage over the black, you can see the parts that are shaded, so it's quite easy to do this first highlight. Now a rule of thumb when painting flesh is to paint the cheeks, the nose, the lips and the brows, if you can see the brows. Now at a later stage I stopped doing the brows because obviously there'll be shading there, so do those main parts like I said, and that's that done. And straight on to the next stage, just lighter and lighter. I think there are 5 different tones on this Expert Flesh. Now at any point in this tutorial you think, oh, that's an acceptable flesh tone for me, then you can move on to the next step. But I think it's, like I said earlier, it's quite nice to paint the flesh just to a slightly higher level. Even if you just do one more highlight than you normally do, it's good to try it. And once those first 3 colours are done, I come in with a wash. Now I do this because those 3 colours, after this wash has been done, those 3 colours will kind of work together. They'll kind of like mould in together, and it's a really nice base for the main highlight of the skin. So with any wash, make sure it's properly dry and come in with the first highlight. Now again, focus only on the raised parts, so the cheeks, the nose and the lips. Now I'm not doing the brows anymore, as you'll notice, and that's because the flesh tone on those upper parts of the brow are more than acceptable. You just want to be focusing on the most extreme parts of the skin now. Notice how I've only got a little bit of paint on the brush when I'm doing these parts. If you have too much, drag it over your thumb or something like that. As you can see, there's a little bit of paint on there. This is the more extreme highlights now. Now I start to paint the nostrils. You can see that I've got a little bit too much paint on my brush there, so I do drag it off on my thumb. So if you do have too much, try that out, see how it works for you. Don't go too overboard with this. You want to just be focusing on the most extreme edges. I think the skin on the face on this guy's the best to show how to paint. And there's this final highlight's really extreme, so you can skip this part if you want to, but I just think it adds another little level, a new level to the model, makes it nice and interesting. Once the skin tone's done, I do come in with a black now to neaten up the beard. Now I'm doing that for 2 reasons. 1, because I want to show you exactly which parts I've painted of the model, and 2, I actually am doing this guy's beard black, so it's kind of 2 in 1 really. Now if you wanted to at this stage, you could paint the beard the base colour that you want it to actually be at the end. So you know, if you wanted it to be blonde, then do like a darker brown colour or something like that. You know, or if you wanted him to be ginger, do like a reddish tone. But in any case, be careful when you're doing this part, because obviously you've painted the skin to a higher level now. So be careful, and make sure you go all the way around, and be careful of the lip as well. When you're painting close to the beard, just make sure that you only have a bit of paint on the brush, and as you can see there, I'm doing it across the brow, moving my brush really slowly. So just make sure you are careful over those parts. So once the skin tone's done, what I generally do with any model that I'm painting is do the surface area, the largest surface area. So with this model, it's metal. Some models it could be cloth. It could be a mixture of both, as is the case with the mountain model that I did on horse. So what I do is I come in with my darkest metallic colour. Obviously this is silver, and I use a brush that's a bit old. Now this is a trusty brush I've had for ages, and you can see the state of it. It's not got a point at all. It's quite frayed, but it's perfect for this kind of thing, because you don't want to be messing up any of your perfectly detailed brushes. Now you have to be careful with it, because obviously you don't want to be painting, you know, just being really messy for no reason. So you don't want a brush that's just absolutely ruined, you know, splaying all over the place. As you can see, obviously I've already kind of got paint on the base, so although I do get a little bit on that base, you can see that I'm still being careful over those parts. So try to be careful even if you are using an older brush, and make sure to get a pretty decent coverage over the metallic parts. Now you can see that the coverage of the paint is pretty good. I'm essentially taking this paint straight out of the bottle now. You shouldn't really do this in all cases, but I don't think there's any need to water down metallics when you're painting over a black base coat. And obviously a black base coat is brilliant for doing metallic. So if you do water down your paints, then that's fine, but I don't think it's really necessary for me in this case, because it's a pretty good consistency anyway, because it covers the black. Obviously it's important to make sure that you get all of the plate and the armor. On these models there's a few different poses and they're not all the same, so just make sure you get all of the parts by just turning it and making sure you get it all, because you don't want to be going back over parts that you've already done. So obviously if you've done metal and then you move on to like a brown or yellow or whatever color you're starting next, and then realize that you've not painted metallic parts, and you have to go back, then it's just taking more time than it needs to. So you can see that I'm moving on to the helmet now, and although the brush is frayed, I'm still being careful over the skin, and obviously trying not to get on the beard either. So if you do think that a messy brush is a bit hard for you to paint over these more detailed areas, then just switch to a finer detail brush. Again, make sure that you paint all the parts that need to be metallic by turning it and checking, and that's the metallic done. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I wanted these models to have the colours of House Clegane, which are yellow and black. Now, because they're the Mountains Men, they're not really uniform, a uniform unit. So I do actually mix this up throughout the unit, as you can see at the start. But I wanted to paint this guy yellow, so I can show you how to paint yellow on different surfaces. So I'll start with this orangey brown tone. This is tan from Wargames Foundry. And you can see that I'm actually using a more detailed brush now, and that's because obviously the metallic parts have been painted or base coated already, so you don't want to be getting all of this colour on to the parts that you've already painted. Now, obviously when you're painting yellow, you can see that the colour doesn't actually have complete coverage in one go. You can still see a bit of the black. You have to be careful not to keep on going over and over the same part to try and get more coverage. It's best to get one layer on, wait for it to dry for a few minutes, and then go over it again after. You can see the brush strokes that I'm doing are quite a regular direction. So in this case it's up and down, in some cases it's left to right. Now you want to do this in a regular pattern rather than in an irregular way, as in, you know, if you go up and down and then left and right on the same spot, that's not what you want to do. You want to keep on going in the same direction. Now what this does is it keeps it easy for you to paint that surface that you're doing, and also prevents the risk of you ripping that surface. Now in some techniques that's fine, but you don't want to be doing that all the time. So try to practice doing up and down brush strokes or left and right brush strokes, but always keep it in the same direction. Now here I'm moving on to the quilted kind of armor on his legs. Now I'm decided to do a brown tone for this. Now this is drab brown. Now, like I said at the start, you can paint this in any way that you want. These are irregular, so I don't do all of the models in the same way. I just think this is a nice contrast between the yellow that's going to be on the kind of loincloth. I don't really know what that's called actually, but yeah, the loincloth at the start. I think this kind of brown, or kind of like a lighter brown, would be a nice contrast to the yellow. So again, I'm being careful not to get it on any of the parts that I've already painted, and I'm using the same up and down strokes, using the same direction to keep it regular. Make sure you get all the parts, obviously, by turning it. I noticed at the back here there's more to do, but on this model that's all that needs to be done for the legs. And once that's done, I can move on to the other parts of the cloth on the model. Now this is the arm material. Now this is only on one arm, weirdly, but I've decided to do like a kind of dark brown grey kind of colour on this. Again, use any colour that you want. Don't be going too crazy with all these weird colours. You want to still have kind of like earthy tones on these guys. These guys haven't got the best clothing and things like that, so I still want to keep it kind of earthy and dark tones. Now a rule when painting these models is that you want to have a few colours that you use on all of the models. So because they're not all going to be the same colour, using 2 or 3 browns, 1 or 2 greys, 1 type of yellow, and then mixing up the colours that you actually use and where you use them on each model is the best thing to do to keep them uniform but at the same time irregular. You can see I'm using the same colour around the neck here. There's a bit of cloth that follows it all the way around, so I just kind of thought that if it's on his arm there, then it probably joins up to kind of like undergarment under his plate. Now again, you can use a different thing, like a different colour if you like, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Alright, so that's done. It's moving on to the next part, and we're starting to do the browns on these bags now. I didn't want them all to be the same colour. You can do them all the same colour if you like, but like I said earlier, use a few different colour of browns and then mix it up on the models to make it look regular but also irregular. I come in with a dark brown for this first one, and I don't use a brown anywhere else on the model. I just want to keep it nice and simple to make sure you block it in. Try not to get it on any other parts of the model. On to the next bag. Again, just a different colour. This is a reddish brown. I think this is a kind of chestnutty colour. Making sure to get into all the cracks and stuff like that. But again, only using it on that part of the model. Now, using different colours obviously takes a little bit longer, but it also makes the figure look a little bit more interesting. And again, with the next one, completely different colour. Again, this is still a reddish brown, but it's still different to the one that's next to it. So nice and easy, quite a quick stage. And again, if you want to keep all of the bags the same colour, then it's much quicker. Just be careful not to get it on any other parts. Once the bags are done, I still have a bit of brown to do. Now I decided to do the scabbard like a rawhide colour. Now you can see that the strappings on the model go over the scabbard as well, so obviously be careful not to get it on them. The scabbard is obviously underneath the strappings, so it doesn't really matter if you get the paint on the strappings. Just make sure that you get all of the parts of the scabbard that are underneath the leather straps painted the colour that you want the scabbard to be. Again, same as always, be careful not to get it on any other parts that you've already painted. Now these are all obviously base coat, so there's a lot of time to fix mistakes, but you know, minor mistakes don't really matter at this stage because obviously there's still highlighting to do and things like that. Again, as always, turn the model around as well. Make sure it makes it easier for your painting hand to get into the positions that you want, rather than your painting hand moving into awkward positions, which makes it uncomfortable for you to do. So after I do the scabbard, I also choose to decide to paint the handle of the sword the same colour. Now this is obviously because I want this all to be kind of tying in with each other, so yeah, you can do that if you want, or you can choose a different colour. I just didn't want to do too many colours on the model. So once that's done, we move on to the straps. Now I want all the straps to be the same colour. On some of the models you might notice that the straps aren't all the same. That just takes forever to do. I wanted to do it because it just adds a different point of interest for models that are actually the same pose. But if you want to, you can do all of the straps the same colour, which is what I'm doing on this model. Now the colour that I'm using is PT Brown from Wargames Foundry, and this is the same colour that I've used for all of my models that have strapping on for the rest of my army. So the Lannister Guardsmen, I want them to look more uniform, so all of their straps have the same colour. So by using the same colour on this model, it keeps the army kind of tied in, even though it's in a different unit. You can see that I'm being careful around the metallic parts. There is like a buckle on the leg strap in there, but I'm not too bothered that I get it over that, because obviously I've not painted the metallic buckle yet, which is what, you know, but that's why we do the leather parts first. So once they're done, obviously I move on to the next part of the strappings. Being careful not to get it on parts that are already painted. You can see that I'm moving my brush from left to right now, like I was saying. It's not good to paint something like that from, you know, up and down, because the leather actually goes from left to right. So you can either move your brush from left to right, or as you can see there, I turn the model sideways to make my brush go up and down. So do it, you know, whichever way you think is easiest for you, but always be conscious of the fact that you should keep your brush, you know, going up or down or left and right, and make the model easy for you to paint by moving your hand that's painting, you know, your hand that's holding the model, sorry, in the most comfortable way for you to paint. Obviously, follow the leather straps around to make sure that you're getting all of it that needs to be painted. Obviously, you don't want to be painting straps metallic, because obviously that's not the right colour. And when going over the scabbard here, you can see how the two browns contrast between each other. Obviously you don't want to get any of this darker brown colour for the straps on the scabbard, but you know, it doesn't really matter at this stage if you do, because you can just fix it or leave it and wait for the highlights to show up. Now, there is quite a lot of these dark brown straps, so maybe you might decide that painting different parts of the straps different colours might be better for you. Obviously just remember that when you're highlighting those different colour straps, that you have to use different colours to highlight them up again, so it will take you a little bit longer to do, but if you think that's better for you, then go ahead and do it that way. Now once that's done, I do actually miss the right arm, that the arm that's holding the sword, the strap that goes across there. So don't forget that. I do notice it after, and it is painted in this clip here, but don't forget to do it yourself. Now once that's done, I can move on to the more detailed parts now. So I'm going over these buckles with gold. Now, like I did on the mountain that rides, I don't want there to be loads and loads of gold on these guys. I don't want them to look like they're, Lannister men that are really rich or anything like that. I only want there to be kind of a few different parts of gold on there, just to add a little bit of visual interest. So again, use a detail brush for this. Don't put too much on the tip of your brush. You can see how much I've got on myself, and just go slowly. When going over the edges there, obviously you can see how I go slowly. I put the brush on to the part that I want to paint, and then slowly move the brush instead of going quick over the parts, which you can kind of see when I'm painting larger surfaces. Again, make sure you turn the model to get all of the parts that you want to be that colour painted. Obviously you don't want to forget anything, because when you've got something that's kind of like a bright colour like gold or yellow or anything like that, and you miss a part of it, it's quite easy to notice that you've missed it. Now sometimes if you do miss a part of the model that's a darker colour, then sometimes you can get away with not painting it, but it's good to practice turning the model and getting into the parts, into all the parts that need to be painted. Again, make sure that you do all of the buckles on the model. Normally what I do is I do all of the legs first, then all of the arms and things like that, but that prevents you from forgetting certain parts. But on this model I kind of just went a bit lackluster with it, and done the parts which drew my eye straight away. But the best way to do it is be methodical with it, to make sure that you do all the parts that need to be done. Again, with the sword, just be nice and slow, because obviously you've painted all the metallic parts on it besides the guard and that now. So any part that you get paint on now will be something that you don't want it to be. And the last part of the metal here is just the weight on the back of the sword. Now you can do this any colour you want. You can do it silver if you like, but I've done it gold on the rest of my models. So you should try to keep these models irregular, but you can do some with gold swords and some with silver swords if you like, but I kept mine all the same. So do whatever you think fits best. Now once all of those base coats are done, I come in with a wash of Agrak Surfshade over the whole model, obviously missing the face, obviously, because that's already done. Now I'm going relatively heavy with this. I don't want to go too crazy with it, because I don't want to kind of wash out all of the colour that's already been put on the base coat, but I don't want the metal to be clean really. Now in comparison to the mountain, who are done with Nuln Oil, which is obviously a black wash, I want these guys to actually look dirty. So representing the fact that they're actually fighting on the battlefield and things like that, and they're not taking care of their armour. But when the mountain's actually in the unit, he will look completely different to them. So it makes them look, or makes him stand out in comparison to them. Now you can see over the orange parts that will be yellow later on, that I have washed over it, but I'm not going crazy with it all. Now you want to make sure that there's no pooling on any of the surfaces, but especially on the orange parts. You only want the recesses to be dark. So obviously when you're doing yours, just take care and take note of how the wash actually is settling on mine, for reference. You can see how I'm kind of putting the wash on and then taking it off with a cleaner brush, and again being careful not to get any on the skin or anything like that. It's very, very important to make sure there's no pooling on any parts of this. You should double check it, and if you need to, triple check it as well. Now this is it finally dry, and you shouldn't paint anything until a wash has been fully dried. What I do is I come in and begin with the orange, or the first highlight for the yellow, which is the same base coat which I used at the start. Now I'll do this instead of the metal because the metal has been painted now and the orange is actually underneath the metal. So if we do the orange parts first, and we get some on the metal, because the metal is actually not highlighted yet, we can go over the metal and it shouldn't go over the yellow. So making sure that you do the highlights of surfaces that are underneath another surface is the order in which you should paint. So another example would be painting the face first and then a helmet on top, because obviously the face is underneath that surface. Or you can do what's another example, like the scabbard is underneath the leather straps, so you'll paint the scabbard first and then the straps after. So always do the surfaces underneath and then do the last surface. The last surface should be the one that's on top. Now you can see that I'm doing, again, up and down strokes, and I'm being careful not to get any into the recesses now, so that I actually start to bring in shading. Now I'll do this base coat, no, this highlight as the base coat again, because obviously you want to have a nice base colour for highlighting up with yellow, because yellow shows quite a lot of the underneath colour, so it needs to be solid for each new layer. Now if you need to, you can go over that colour twice. I didn't need to, but some people may need to do that. So if you need to, make sure it's properly dry and then go over it again with the same colour. This is the new colour, so it's the yellow mixed in with the base colour 50-50. Now you might have a colour at home which is like a light orange, or the next step up from the base colour that you've already used. Now you can just use that straight from the bottle if that's the colour you have. I don't actually have that, so I've kind of mixed 50-50 yellow and the original colour. And when highlighting, make sure you do the most prominent edges. This is quite nice on this model because the edges of this cloth are very, very prominent and easy to see. So generally it's kind of like 3 main lines on each of the front and back part of the cloth. So just follow them. Obviously when you're doing each highlight, you just do less and less until you get to your maximum level of highlight. Again, don't go over and over a surface trying to make it more bold until that has been properly dried. You can see how it's quite a slight highlight, but when it dries it becomes more vibrant. So just be patient when doing yellow. And again, like I said before, you don't have to do this colour on all of the models, so if you don't like painting yellow, then you don't have to do yellow on these models. You can do like a brown or a red or black if you want to. Any colour that you think suits better. So once that's done, make sure all of the edges are highlighted properly and make sure that's dry. So once that's done, you can see how it's kind of like nice and bold now, and actually come in with the yellow by itself. So that's the yellow that I mixed in. Now it's just the yellow by itself, and you can see how, because the colour underneath is smooth and vibrant, that the yellow now goes on smooth. Now the yellow won't have, or most yellows won't have complete 100% coverage over the surface underneath, so don't go crazy trying to get that bold colour, and you're obviously trying to do less and less to create a nice highlight now. Go slowly, only put a little bit on your brush so that you're not doing too much at a time and it's not too hard for you to control. You can see how obviously now that because I'm doing less and less of the highlight, it's actually quite quick to go through these colours. Also notice how I keep on, paint a bit of the model, then I go back to my paint and then get a bit more, just a little bit, and then go over it again, and then I'm careful not to do too much at once. And if you have too much paint, then you start to lose detail and it looks a bit thick, and there's not a good transition. Once that first yellow's done, you can do another layer of it if you want to make it more vibrant. And this is the final highlight, which is essentially yellow mixed with white or ivory. This is a pre-mixed yellow, but like I say, it's essentially just the same yellow colour mixed with white. With this colour, you want to just do the most prominent edges, so the lines that the crease of the cloth creates in the middle, or the edge, and that's all you need to do for that. So just be careful not to go over all the parts that you've already painted, because otherwise it kind of defeats the point of you highlighting in the first place. So you can see how bright this colour is in comparison to the yellow that I used at the earlier stage. Again, making sure my brush strokes are going up and down in a regular way. I do decide to go over the yellow again with an even lighter yellow. Now you can miss this stage if you want to, if you think that the yellow that you've got on your model is an acceptable colour for you. As with any highlight, just make sure that you do less and less. Now, because this obviously is the most extreme highlight for this colour that I'm using, I am honestly just being so careful just to do the littlest parts, just to add a nice stark highlight. You can see how much of a difference it makes in comparison to the colour that's underneath it. Now you can do this on any colours that you want if you like. Again, being careful over the edges, just doing the smallest amount. And that's the yellow done. So now that that's done, I decided to do the parts that I started off with when I first base coated. So the cloth on this arm here. Now this is obviously quite a quick stage because it's the only part of the model that really has this colour. Now obviously it's hard for you to kind of follow this stage if you haven't used the same colour, but it's essentially the same thing whichever colour you use. So you just use the one level up from the colour that you've used. Now obviously not everyone has you may not have the next level up from the colour that you use as a base coat. If you're a new painter, obviously you'll have less colour choices than someone that's been painting for a long time and has lots of different colours. Now what you can do to kind of take your colour to the next level of highlight is use a white or cream colour. Now you have to be careful when doing this because it can change the original colour to a colour that you might not want. But if you do want to take it to a new highlight colour, then using one of those two colours, a white or an ivory, or a similar colour like that, to take it up to the next level of highlight, then try that and see how it works out for you. Now you can keep on adding this colour to a newer highlight and a highlight after that if you wanted to make it even more of a higher level of contrast. But again, just be careful and make sure that you don't go too crazy with it to make it a colour that you didn't originally want. Now because the colours that I'm using are come in threes, like an A, a B and a C, because they're from Morgane's Foundry, obviously I know that the colour that I'm going to use next is going to be a perfect match highlight wise for that original colour. Now, if you want to try out the Foundry colours, then obviously go and check them out. But most companies do have you know, a set of colours that complement the colour that you use as a base coat. You know, a base coat, a shade, or a highlight. So obviously match them colours when you're highlighting to make sure that the colour that you actually do is a perfect highlight for you. And obviously remember that when you're highlighting, only do the extreme edges to see the darker colour underneath. Now with that grey cloth done, I can move on to this kind of quilted armour now. Now because the shade is obviously settled in the recesses and properly dried, I can see the raised edges, so they're the parts that obviously you want to highlight with this new colour. Now be careful with this because it's quite easy to make a mistake and get into the recesses. So make sure that you just get a bit of a little bit of paint on the tip of the brush and just slowly move over that surface. Now you could dry brush this if you wanted to. The problem with that is obviously the area that it's in is surrounded by the yellow that you've already painted. So you have to be careful of that. You could leave it with the base coat and the shade, the wash shade, if you wanted to speed up the process more if you wanted to. I think picking out the actual raised edges of this kind of quilted leather armour on the legs makes it pop really nicely in comparison to the yellow. Obviously this does take a little bit longer than some other stages of the model because obviously there's quite a lot of you know, raised edges to do, and obviously this is only one leg. Make sure that you do both of them. The colour I'm using is drab, so it's kind of just like a, I don't even know what you kind of call it, like a straw brown sort of colour really. But if you use a different colour, again, just use that highlight colour to highlight it. Again, as always, make sure you're careful and neat when you're doing this stage. You have to be more neat when you're highlighting than you do when you're base coating for obvious reasons. Now, everyone makes mistakes in their painting. At this stage, it's not so hard to correct a mistake because obviously if you get it into the recesses, then you can just go over it with a base colour, the base colour that you used, and then just wash it with the same colour that you washed it with, and then it should be corrected. Again, make sure you turn the model, making sure you don't forget any of the parts that you painted at the base coating stage. We're nearly done with this part now. Now you can leave this now if you want to, because it's already been highlighted. But what I decided to do is take it up to another level and go to the most extreme highlight and just kind of dot areas of colour just to create more interest. Now obviously I am using 3 colours when I'm using most colours on this model, because I'm using the Wargames Foundry which come in 3s. Now if you can do less or more if you wanted to take it up to a high level, or if you wanted it to be more of a tabletop quality, then you can do less. So I think the colours that you use when you're painting make quite a lot of difference to what stage of you know, what level of painting that you do. But I think colours that you know, companies that create colours that come in sets that allow you to go up to a level that you want to, make it a lot easier for painters or newer painters to reach a level that they find desirable for them. Now if you wanted to go up to a higher level, the problem is that I've only got 3 colours, so you could just add white in to add even more of a stark highlight, but I think that's acceptable. So now that that's done, I decided to go to the bags. Now in the same frame I use all of the I highlight all of these bags. Now I do have all of these 3 colours out open ready for me to use, so this would all be coming up really quickly. But you know, with a dark brown, I use the second highlight color. As mentioned earlier, if you don't have the right highlight color, then just mix in a bit of a creamy color or a white. Now, only a little bit. You don't want to be making these highlights really bright, because it will just look really out of place. So just make sure that the highlight color that you're doing is nice and subtle for the first level of highlight, because if you have it really bright, then it might just look really cartoony and weird. So if you are struggling with highlighting on certain areas, then you can dark down the color, or you know, by using the original base color that you've used. So you can see that I've moved on to the next color there on that first bottle really quickly, obviously leaving the recesses, and then moving on to the next bottle by using the second highlight for that. Again, when you're highlighting the first color, make sure that you get a general gist of where the highlights want to be, whilst also leaving the most extreme recesses that darker color. And with that first base coat done, obviously make sure it's dry before moving on to the next part, and then come in with the most extreme highlight. So this is the final highlight for them, so even brighter color. Now with this color, the same as what I did on the yellow, I'm being careful not to get it into the recesses, and only focusing on the most extreme edge parts. Now obviously this just makes the surface that you're painting, whether it be a bag or leather or metal, look like it's got shading on, even if it's a flat surface. You can see where, you know, if you're struggling with a few of these highlights on this kind of model, or any other model really, you can see exactly where I put the highlights to kind of get an idea of where you should be putting the highlights yourself. With the highlights on the bags there, obviously because they're round, all I do is follow the crease of the sculpting, and that's all I do. You don't want to go crazy with these edge, these super bright highlights, because it just gets too much. And that's the bags done, nice and quick. Moving on to the next brown. Again, like I said earlier, you start with the surface that's underneath another. So I'll start with the actual scabbard itself, and I'm only focusing on the edges now because they're the raised parts. This is rawhide. I think I mentioned it earlier. Yeah, rawhide. And because the colour underneath it's really dark, it's quite easy to see how I'm highlighting it and how nice it looks when you highlight. Now obviously you can do more stark highlight if you want to, but this scabbard is quite nicely detailed, so you can see exactly where you want the highlights to go. Yeah, and be careful, try not to get on any parts that aren't the right colour. Obviously I make a mistake, so I just dry the brush, clean the brush, dry it, and then just drag off a bit of that paint that I don't want it where I don't want it. Because I use the same colour for the scabbard as I did the sword handle, obviously don't forget to do that if you've done it the same way as I've done. Now the sword handle has nice grip on it, so it's quite easy to tell what parts should be lighter, what parts should be darker. So just be careful on these parts. Now you can dry and brush that if you want to, it makes it a little bit easier, but because the highlight colour is so bright in comparison to the darker base colour, you might find it a bit hard to highlight with a dry brush. So do it in any way that you think is best for you. I just find it easier to do it this way. Again, with the colours that I've done earlier, this is the third colour, so the most extreme highlight, and again doing just the most extreme highlights just to create a proper edge highlight. As with any stage where it becomes a really bright colour, it gets much quicker because you're just doing less of the model when you're painting. You can see where that scabbard essentially is done in about 5-10 seconds. So if you don't normally do this step, I do suggest trying it because it does add another level to your model. But again, you don't have to if you don't want to. With the sword, I only do the topmost part because that's the most extreme edge that will be caught by the light. That's the brown on that done, and I'll move on to the straps now. Same thing with all the other colours again. Second highlight. Now with the straps, what I do is I do the top edge and the bottom edge, and I leave the middle part darker to represent the shading. Now this isn't particularly realistic, but for a model like this, it shows you highlights and shadows better than it would be if you're doing it in a more realistic way, if you want to call it that. Same thing as always. Do be careful when you're doing these highlights, so just put a little bit of paint on the tip of your brush. If you've got too much paint on, if it looks like you've got a big dollop on the end of your brush, then it's too much. The best way to kind of see whether you've got too much or not is you should see the shape of the tip of your brush, and when you put paint on, if it's the same shape, then it's enough paint. If it's not the same shape, then it's too much. As I mentioned earlier as well, make sure that you trace exactly where all of the leather straps go around the whole model, so that you don't forget something that's really obvious. Because the metal's not been done on any of the armor at this point in time, you can if you do get a bit on it, then you don't have to worry too much. It's the same with the gold buckle there. But be careful, be neat in as many stages as possible to kind of progress with your painting. I think it's better to be neat and take more time than it is to be quick and be slapdash with it. So just take your time and be nice and neat. You can see me obviously checking to make sure that the highlights look right, making sure that I've not forgotten anything before I move on to the next part. You might have also noticed as well where there's a bit of leather strapping going over the bags on the back, so I do actually use this same leather colour to paint them, just to create a different colour there, so it doesn't all look the same. And with that, that's the first colour done for that, the brown. And then again, even lighter brown now. You can miss this if you want, same thing that I said earlier. I think this, if you did miss any of the stages earlier with the extra highlight, I would suggest actually doing it on this the most, because it is the brown on the model that's most obvious. The colour brown that covers the most parts of the model. So when you highlight this part, it will show up even nicer. Now you can see how there I do the straps across the bag, obviously making it look like that the leather on the that's keeping the bags attached to the guy is the same material. Obviously only doing a little bit when I'm highlighting that, because obviously the edges of these leather straps are already really thin anyway. You don't even have to do that much when you're highlighting to make it look like it's been highlighted again. So only do a few spots that make it look like highlights there. Now, if you think to yourself, oh, should I do an extra highlight there, then I'd suggest you probably don't need it to be there. If it doesn't look super obvious that there should be another level of highlight there for you, then don't bother doing it, because it probably doesn't need it. Again, making sure that I do all the parts. You can also notice as well that I do the same kind of process. So I start with like the straps on the legs, and then I move on to the leather belt and stuff like that. It's good to keep a kind of routine when you're painting a model, just to make sure that you do all the parts that need to be done. You can see how this third highlight makes a lot of difference on the scabbard and the the straps on it. So I think it came out really nicely with not too much effort and not too much time. That's the leather straps done, and it's looking really nice now. Now we can actually move on to the final parts before we actually start doing the metal, which is the golden parts. Now normally I would leave these parts till last, but I just thought, because the metal covers the most of the model, and where I'm touching the silver parts, I don't want to actually paint the silver and then touch it after I've painted it, because it could rub off. So I thought the best thing to do at this point in time is do the golden parts, because I'm not actually touching them. So same as always, the second level, the second colour in the three colours that I use when I'm doing painting. And again, you can see, because we've done the shading with the wash, you can see exactly where the first highlight should be on the surface that you're painting, whether that be the end of the scabbard there or the actual crossguard for the sword. Again, make sure that you leave some of the original recessed colour underneath, so it actually makes it look like it's shaded and highlighted. I think the sword's one of the most satisfying parts, because it starts to make it look really, really nice. Yeah, that's just something that I enjoy painting on this. I do actually really enjoy painting metallics, because it actually is a lot easier to highlight than certain colours, because you can see the parts that need to be highlighted in the light that you're using when you're painting. So you can turn the model to see, if you're struggling on a certain part, you can turn the model to see exactly where that highlight should really be going. Now moving on to the sword, obviously I'm leaving that kind of middle part darker, as in the same way that I did with the leather straps, and making sure you turn it. I'm not being too I'm not going crazy with trying to get into the awkward parts, because those parts would be darker anyway, and you're not going to pick up a model and look at those parts. No one's going to look at do that. So don't go mad with trying to highlight those parts that are in more awkward positions. With the final front buckle done, that's the first highlight of the gold done. Finally come in with the last gold colour. Now you can see where I kind of spot on this gold colour. Now I'm just kind of like dotting the colour on here. Now it's a very, very subtle colour, because you don't want it to overpower the gold that you've already done. So I'm only putting the littlest amount on. Now I'm doing this out of force of habit, but you might not even be able to notice it too much on the video, but in person it makes quite a lot of difference, this gold colour. So if you have a similar colour, then you can do the same. If you want to, you could also use silver to highlight the gold, but do it the littlest amount, and that's the gold finally done. Before moving on to the armour, the final part to do is the beard. Now at the start I said that I'm going to do this black, and the only colour that I'm using to highlight this black is a kind of charcoal grey. Now when you're painting black, obviously if you highlight it with a grey, sometimes it can make it actually look like it's grey. Now be very careful when you're highlighting black with it, but you can see I only do the smallest amount, and it literally takes a few seconds for it to be done. Now everything's done besides the armour, and if you watch my Mountain That Rides video, I'm doing the same technique as I did with him, which is just doing the most extreme edges. Now, because I shaded with Agrak Surfshade, a brown, it makes the metal look dirty, and when you highlight the edges, it makes those edges look nice and shiny, and then in comparison to the the parts that haven't been highlighted, it just makes it look like a really nice stark contrast, which is perfect for the kind of effect that I want these guys to have on their armor, which is making it look like they've not come out of a battle yet. They've still been fighting, or they've just not been taking care of their armor as much as possible. Now, these models have great detail, and it's very easy to see exactly which parts you want to be highlighting on the edges. Now, you can see when I paint the male parts on the legs and the arm that I'm only being very light with the brush, and I'm not painting the whole lot of the male. Obviously, I don't want that to look shiny in comparison to the rest of the armor. So I begin with both legs, and they're nice and quick to do, and you can see how the male at the front there, I'm being careful just to do it on the tips, and obviously you want to do a light dry brush because you don't want it to look, you don't want a metal colour to go into the recesses. So with the plate armour, the detail's quite nice, you can see where you want to be painting. Now obviously the middle ridge is quite prominent, so I do a line down the middle of that, and then make sure I follow the edges and then do the rivets on that as well. Now this is an important part of the model because obviously it's the most it's the largest area of the model at the front of it, so just be careful when you're doing this, make sure you do the lines as straight as possible. And then here you can see I'm doing some kind of like weathering on the armor, and then I'm lining above the leather straps just to redefine the fact that this is actually a metal part. Obviously the plates, because it's quite nice and flat, it's not really something that takes super long to do, but just make sure that you do it to the level that you're happy with, and then obviously you can move on to the next part. Now again, remember when we're doing this, we're trying to depict the fact that the armor on these guys isn't actually super buffed up and shiny, but actually it's kind of worn and battle worn, been well used. So don't go super over the top with these highlights, especially because the silver that I'm using at this point in time is actually really bright. Now again, obviously you'll have your own silver colours, so obviously you'll know what level is best for this kind of technique. As I said at the start of this stage, because the model has quite a lot of detail on, it's really easy to see what parts need to be painted. But as I also mentioned as well, if you are struggling with certain parts, you can turn the model in certain light and see where the light catches in those areas the most, and then you can just follow those lines for the highlights. Now you have to be careful with this though, obviously, because certain light will catch in different areas according to the direction that you're holding the model in. So just take a bit of time if you're struggling to decide where certain highlights should be, and just try and figure out exactly where you want them to be or where they should actually be. The shoulder plate that I'm doing here is a really good example of that, because it's not just a round surface, but it's actually kind of got like a ridge in the middle of it as well as going down over these kind of triceps. So I start off with doing the edge of the surface, which is the thing that is the most important part, and then I kind of look at the light, and from above it looks like that part's shiny, so all I do is just kind of feather out the paint over that surface so that it looks like the light is catching it, which looks really nice. Now obviously once you turn it in the light, you can't really tell that that's it doesn't look irregular, so it works. So if you need to try and experiment with certain surfaces and see what looks best, then it's not really hard to fix over it, because obviously it's only just a one colour and then a wash to get it back to the level that it was before you started highlighting. So just don't be afraid to experiment if you need to. Now again with these, obviously because we're doing the edges, I'm not going crazy with trying to get into like the under parts of the metal, even though I did actually base coat them with metal at the start when I painted them. So only focus on the parts that need to be, you know, that are exposed to light the most. And as I mentioned with the other stages as well, if you're thinking to yourself, you know, should I really be painting this part with a highlight, 9 times out of 10 you probably shouldn't be bothering with trying to do it. We're getting on to the final parts of the metal now, and I'm moving on to the helmet. Now obviously, as with any stage that you've painted beforehand, be careful when you're highlighting something else near it. The helmet's really nice because it has very prominent edges, and it also has these kind of holes for you know, breathing holes, if you want to call them that. So you can kind of follow the circular indentation of the sculpt to kind of bring out those details even more if you like. I think I just kind of do a quick dry brush over there, depicting the fact that light kind of will hit that top part and then kind of shine over it, even though the armour is worn. You can see that I'm not going over the top with it to still represent the fact that that armour is actually, you know, dirty. Again, make sure you do the edges first when you're highlighting, so that then you know that those parts are all done, and then you can move on to the bulkier parts. That, you know, the main part. So obviously the edge of the helmets there is quite nice and obvious, and then you can do the main ridge down the front of his helmet there. Now with the kind of cap part of his helmet, you can see where the light's hitting it, so I kind of just do like a kind of like a ball of paint and then just kind of buff it out. But I'm leaving, you know, I'm being careful to make sure I leave the darker recesses, that kind of wash brown colour. You know, not going crazy to make it look like it's been, you know, it's got really shiny helmet but dirty armour. That just wouldn't look right. You see I'm going pretty quick here, but make sure you take your time with it if you need to take your time. And if you're not happy with the brightness of it, just go over it again with a bit more of that same colour. You can see how the armour looks really nice now in the fact that it's now highlighted up. And the final part to do with the silver is actually the sword now. So with this I decided to just do the main edges of it, so the two sword edges and then the prominent middle ridge on the sword, and I'll leave the black, you know, like the darker wash in the recesses. I was going to do the same thing for the mountain that rides, but I thought it would look better if I made his sword shinier. But for these guys, I think it's really nice to leave the kind of black, you know, the darker tone in between the two edges. And you can see here where I do make a little bit of a mistake because I'm not being careful when I'm painting. You can see where I kind of get too much there, and I try to sort it out, and actually it makes a bit more of a mess. So all I do is just, whilst the paint is still wet, just use my finger to brush it all off, and it's a simple, easy fix. Obviously once I do that I have to redefine those lines again, but it's not you know, it's not too hard to do that, and you have to obviously make sure that you don't do any more than those edges. Obviously make sure you turn the model around and get the edges on the other side. Now you can see where I'm holding the head of the helmet there, and be careful when you're doing this because obviously you've painted that part already. Now you should really wait for it to dry. I've waited for it to dry in between, and that's the model done. Now with a quick basing and, you know, a bit of flock and a nice black rim, I think it looks really nice. The black rim obviously is what I use for the whole army. It just makes it look a lot more neater, and the basing style is just what I've used for the whole army. Here you can see the whole unit with the mountain. I think they look really nice, and you can see also where I've kind of made them all a bit different. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and share with anyone you think might also enjoy it. If you'd like to see more of this type of content, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to paint and play.